All right, parents, here we go again. It's the Ask Dr. Tony episode. This is the Experience Miracles podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, an expert in pediatrics, neurodevelopmental disorders, and drug-free, nervous system-focused healthcare. On this weekly episode, I'll be addressing the top questions on every parent's mind. If there's one thing we love and welcome, it's parents who never stop learning, asking the hard questions, and advocating for your kiddos like none other. So get ready for some real talk, real-life clinical and parenting experience, and real easy to understand answers that will help your family take action and get to that next level of health and healing. You ask, I answer. Let's dive into today's episode. Hi everybody, Dr. Tony checking in for our weekly Q&A, and I love you guys. You are asking so many great questions, and now we kind of get these questions coming into the platform in, I'll call it 3 tiers. For sure, the most common questions are about conditions. So your child has received a diagnosis of autism or POTS or epilepsy or whatever it may be. So we will continue to do tons of episodes about conditions and really break down the root cause of them, the neuroscience behind them, and then the drug-free strategies to promote optimal healing as much as we can for different conditions. So that's kind of the first group of questions. So continue to send them in. If we have not done a deep dive, episode, video, article on your child's condition, keep DMing us, keep commenting, keep emailing, because we love diving deep and giving you answers on those. So upcoming here, we have deep dive episodes on motor tics planned. We're going to get into POTS in a major way. We're going to get into pandas and PANS one more time. And so whatever your kiddo is struggling with condition-wise, by all means, send it in and I will tackle it. And if you've listened to any of these, you know that we dive deep. We don't just talk about conditions on a surface level. We don't just talk about here's their symptoms, here's how you stuff down their symptoms. Definitely, we don't talk about that. Medications, that's the business of medicine. And so conditions. Second group of questions that we continue to get are awesome. It's about all things holistic, right? Functional medicine. So we get a ton of questions about nutrition and diet changes and detoxes and supplements and saunas and hyperbaric oxygen and airway. You guys really love that episode with Dr. Bahar. We'll be doing more of that as well. We're going to talk about airway. We're going to talk about just CSF flow, myofunctional. We're going to talk about a lot of that stuff. So keep those questions coming. I know it can be really difficult to wade through all of those holistic natural health waters and Facebook groups and everything else and try and figure out what is the best out of this kind of whole arena, and then what is the best approach? What is the best this? And so we'll continue to tackle that and bring on other experts from the biomedical, from the integrated medicine. I was just messaging our best friend and world changer, Jessica. Again, if you listen to her interview, we really dug into antibiotics and some things with pandas real early upon the launch of the Experience Miracles podcast. Not exactly what episode, but Jessica's going to come back on. I've reached out to my buddy, Dr. Josh Axe again, Dr. Will Cole. We're going to really continue to go down that world. And then number 3 really leads us to today, okay? So today's question has to do with really finding what I like to call the hidden in plain sight root cause, because we're going to talk about actually how to find out if our kids' nervous systems are overstressed, if our nervous systems are dysregulated and overstressed. Right now you're thinking, oh no, I better jump off of this one. He's going to talk about my stressed out, wound up, worn out nervous system. Yeah, but the number one cause most likely of your parental stressed out, wound up, worn out, dysregulated nervous system is the fact that your kiddos is there. So we're going to talk all about the most cutting edge, life-changing, and I mean it. I know this is like, whoa, what words to lead off with, but I promise to back them up. The technology that we're going to talk about with the neurological inside scans, and I'm going to get real granular, real nerdy, but keep it real simple as always here on this episode. That's the technology that can transform your child and your family's life, because you'll finally be able to find it. So what I love about this question and all the questions having to do with the nervous system, it's never been more fun, more impactful, and in the best of ways, more difficult to keep up being a nervous system focused practitioner, because for many generations, the traditional, oh, it's genetic, it's bad luck, here's your medication, that was the dominant frame of thinking around sickness, health, disease, all these things. So the traditional medical system was really the whole conversation, right? Then in the last 10 to 20 years, in our last generation, the wellness, the holistic natural health conversation has exploded. And I know we've got a long ways to go to reverse the trend of chronic illness, but it's starting. We're starting to get our stuff together with diet and nutrition and how there's just chemicals all over the place. So we need to get toxins out. So that is the most exciting time ever, because I'm a big wellness guy too. I'm a big natural health guy. So pretty stoked to be raising my kids and living in this era where we're finally getting that shifted and getting that ship righted. But I've known this whole time that there was a very foundational, absolutely essential, and I mean those words to the purest, fullest of their definitions, an absolutely essential conversation that was missing, that nobody else was having with you guys, and that's around the nervous system. So now to be practicing, now to be living, now to be having a podcast in this time where the trending topics are things like nervous system regulation, nervous system dysregulation, stress, vagus nerve, dysautonomia. These are conversations that I've always been praying and planning and trying to get out to the world. And we've had the technology. This technology I'm going to talk about, it's extremely cutting edge. It may sound like brand new to you, but it's actually been utilized within the chiropractic profession since the mid-90s, when some incredible pioneers and just brilliant neurological wizards, I like to call them, and mentors of mine really brought this technology from, kind of a cool story, from NASA. So quick little story that's in there. So what we know is that when an astronaut leaves gravity, their autonomic nervous system goes haywire, okay? I'm going to be real brief with this because it's a weird story, but it's a relative story. Because the way our brain is actually oriented, you know how you learn all the time when you're a natural health mama, you learn all about the gut-brain connection? Well, there's a brain-body connection. I'm going to call it body to have you think about the nerves and the muscles and the structures, okay? So bones and muscles and ligaments, but most importantly, what's called the sensory motor nerves, sensory being the key word, that connects our muscular system to our brain. So if you've ever had your kiddo through OT, PT, low tone, hypersensitivity, stimming, motor tics, seizures, it's a tone, it's a brain-body connection issue. And so what happens is when you lose touch with gravity, the brain literally loses its mind, you could say, because 90% of the brain's energy, focus really comes from movement. Not just nutrition. It comes from this, think of like these sensory motor neurons going into the brain. That is the most essential nutrient, neurological nutrient into the brain. And you don't have to overthink it. That's why when you sit around all day and don't move, your brain is stressed, anxious, foggy, grumpy. When you go exercise. So moms, what's your move? You know, some of you are runners. If you don't run, your brain is a mess. If you don't go to yoga, your brain is a mess. If you don't go to HIIT workouts and CrossFit and all the things, your brain is a mess. So movement is life, okay? We all know that. And so the reason the way this technology came about is they started to discover that the neurological function of astronauts, even when they would just test and they would kind of take gravity away in the simulators, would absolutely go to shambles. They'd come back down, get reconnected with gravity, and not be able to regulate their nervous system. Their sleep would be a mess. Their anxiety would go through the roof. Their digestive system and inflammation, so their immune systems would crash. Basically, what was happening is when you disconnected these people and then tried to reconnect them to gravity, they would develop chronic neurological driven diseases, okay? And so this technology actually started there. So we're going to talk about thermal and EMG, and then most importantly, HRV. And then it's a whole long, random, goofy story as to how that landed in chiropractic. But chiropractic has always been about measuring nervous system function. On the negative side, you could say measuring nervous system dysfunction, because we've always been about our adjustment. Our care is the most potent, effective thing in the world. A chiropractic adjustment smokes a cold plunge. It absolutely annihilates a sauna. It has more neurological potency than deep breathing, yoga, essential oils. And I'm listing 5 things right there that I do in my life every single week. If you end up watching on YouTube, it's kind of blurred out in the back with the way my camera goes. I've got an infrared sauna right behind me with red light therapy and everything. Those are awesome things to regulate your nervous system and restore function. But most of our children and most of us have nervous system damage due to the perfect storm. And I'm going to use a heavy word right out of the gates. So dysregulation, dysfunction, and damage have different levels of depth. Another D word to bring it into conversation. So when we have a child that has gone through the perfect storm pathway where fertility and pregnancy was high stress, there was physical birth trauma, forceps, vacuum, breech, cord wrap, C-section, induction, those things. And then they were colicky and they were fussy and they had tons of antibiotics and they had tons of injections and everything else. Their nervous system, and I'm jumping right into it, their nervous system is damaged. The level of dysfunction and dysregulation and what's called subluxation and sympathetic dominance and dysautonomia within our kids' nervous systems today is at a level of depth that essential oils, deep breathing, walking barefoot in nature can't touch. But chiropractic adjustments have the depth, the potency, and the direct conduit through the spine and the central nervous system and autonomic nervous system and vagus nerve and sensory motor system to be able to repair and then restore, rebuild, and reorganize neurological function. So all of that takes us back to this question where many of you asked, can you do a deep dive into the INSiGHT scans? One mommy said, I'm mesmerized by this technology. I can't get enough of it. I want to learn more of it. So I'm going to do what we always love to do on this podcast. I'm going to go very deep. I already introduced some pretty nerdy neurological terms. We got more of them. And in the same breath, we'll continue to do the two-step Tony Tango. Okay, no, I'm not dancing, but if you do ever take me to a wedding, now that wedding would probably I need to have at least like maybe one, I can dance at a wedding, okay? So remember, I always like to sneak in random stories to a little bit of get to know you. Believe it or not, that's kind of the first night I met my wife. Am I really going to tell this story on the podcast? But I'm happy, I'm having fun, and I was dancing. Oh, geez, now some of you are going to be like, live up to this, bro. And I can't really anymore at 43. But anyways, how did I get on dancing? Because it's maybe all the words that start with D, depth and everything else. Goodness gracious. So I'm going to do the two-step tango of going deep into the neuroscience while also keeping it really simple, straightforward, and easy for you to understand, including some random life stories and analogies per usual on the Experience Miracles podcast. Okay, so let's set the tone as to why these INSiGHT scans are so important. I'm going to rip through 3 different pediatric cases: chronic, nervous system, sensory, spectrum cases. So really tough neurological cases in kids, because I know a lot of our audience, you're not just working with colic and constipation and chronic ear infections. And by the way, I hate that I have to kind of like minimize that stuff or compare it, but let's just call a spade, seizures and POTS and autism. And these things are really, really, really tough. They're a whole nother level, right? Back to our depth conversation. So these 3 kids, I'm going to tell you the story to set the frame as to how valuable the INSiGHT scans are to their parents and to us as providers. Will really help you understand why knowing all about these yourselves as a parent is so important, okay? So first off, I want to start with a little buddy called Levi the Legend, all right? So Levi the Legend is my nickname for him. And Levi is actually an incredible kiddo who really went through a traumatic injury to his brain and nervous system, but he was born into the most courageous, incredible family. And so he really was the catalyst. I had been journaling on this and praying on this and kind of building this behind the scenes. And it was Levi who God sent to our clinic that really kicked off the intensive program and his incredible family, okay? Well, that's about 4 years ago, maybe even going on 5 years ago. And so Levi started to get neurologically focused chiropractic. I had just begun PX and training other pediatric chiropractors, but we had not been able to have the certification program at the depth, I guess that's going to be our word of today, near the depth and advancement that it is today. So when we sent Levi home to his chiropractors back home to continue that care, they just weren't quite able to keep up with scanning him, so running these INSiGHT scans. It had been a long time since he got scanned, so he was still getting adjusted occasionally, but the adjustments weren't exactly on track. The adjustments were missing the mark. And so what Levi was struggling with is, for a time, he had regained head and neck control. For a time, he had been sleeping better and pooping better on his own. For a time, he had been less kind of, you would say, sensitive and so wound up and had these retained primitive reflexes. So they were stressed. He wasn't sleeping. He couldn't hold his head and neck up anymore. And they were asking questions. This ATNR and this TNR, these retained primitive reflexes were in there. Well, retained primitive reflexes are only ever going to stay stuck in your child's nervous system if there is what's called a major or primary nervous system dysfunction, there's a catch-all word for that called subluxation, and only the most advanced, most in-depth chiropractors address this at that level. And so these subluxations were really still stuck in Levi's neurospinal system, and they were severe. And they were in a location that most chiropractic techniques are not trained to look at. So our technology is advanced in PX Docs work, especially with intensive programs. And we also deploy much more cutting edge advanced techniques. And I got to tell you, the reason we know to adjust in the ways that we do, and I'm going to break down the 4 levers before we're done with this episode, is actually because the technology is not only, these scan reports are not only life-changing for you to see, mom and dad, but they're life transforming for us to make the most accurate and effective adjustments. So where Levi was getting adjusted prior to 2 weeks ago when he returned to PwC and we got updated INSiGHT scans on him, they were not going to be effective adjustments. They weren't going to hurt anything. That's the coolest thing about chiropractic. At worst, it's neutral. At best, it's life transforming within 2 adjustments. Targeted adjustments, because his INSiGHT scans showed me exactly where he needed to be adjusted and how he needed to be adjusted. So that's 2 out of the 4 levers we'll teach here today. We made 2 specific neurologically focused adjustments. Levi's ATNR reflex was virtually gone in 48 hours. They've been working on it for years. Then we moved on to another subluxation that his scans, because we rerun and track these scans. Then we were able to get his head and neck back on. So the feeding therapy, the OT, the PT he was doing could actually take root. And in a matter of 2 weeks, Levi was able to make more progress in these key areas, getting rid of retained reflexes and really taking to his therapies in 2 weeks than he had been, you could probably almost say, in a year or 2, all right? The scans led us to the accuracy and the depth of that adjustment. Cal is up next. Cal just started care in our office this week. Cal is a drunken bull, by what we like to say. So he is so dysregulated. He's got tons of sleep issues. He's got tons of gut issues. That's kind of his basic physiological dysregulation symptoms. But his motor system, his sensory system, and his social emotional system are a mess as a result of this drunken bull, disorganized dysregulation and subluxation as well. And so there's no speech, there's no socialization, there's a lot of challenges that would fit a pretty significant autism diagnosis. Because the scans were so accurate, telling us exactly where Cal was subluxated, and the level of what we call neurological exhaustion. So I've done a podcast episode about the 3 phases of subluxation, dysfunction, and dysregulation. And the most severe, if you have a child who has autism regression or chronic neurological issues, I promise you they have reached stage 3 of neurological dysfunction, which is exhaustion. The INSiGHT scans find that. We can guess, and I mean that word, we can guess from a case history by looking at a kiddo, the depth, the chronicity of their challenges, the severity of their challenges, and taking enough case histories and then running enough of these scans. I can tell you when a child is not just stressed out, stage 1, but very disorganized, dysregulated, stage 2, and I can likely tell, hey, they probably have fallen into neurological exhaustion, stage 3, but I don't know for sure. We like to say we don't guess, we test with these INSiGHT scans. We don't know until we literally test it. So I was able to find that for Cal, his neuroadrenal thoracic transitional zone core. You're like, wow, that's a bunch of nerdy words. Don't worry about them. It's the middle of his neurospinal system was exhausted. And he needed specific, what are called neurotonal HVLA adjustments. And within 2 days of adjustments, 4 adjustments to the thoracic transitional area, which is an area most pediatric chiropractors never adjust, because if they don't use this technology, they wouldn't find it. And with a technique that most pediatric chiropractors, because other training organizations outside of PX Docs do not teach their doctors to use this technology, so they are practicing with 1988 protocols, because if they're not using 2025 clinical testing, neurological INSiGHT scans, you can't then adjust with the depth and the advancement and the results that we do as PX Docs. So these areas for Cal would have been overlooked, not just by other providers, but by chiropractors as well. And making those very specific targeted adjustments in the right location with the right technique, with the right what's called torque, We were able to change Cal in 24 hours. He was sleeping through the night. He was calmer. His body was more relaxed, more efficient. He was making eye contact. He was attempting a few words. He was sitting in his dad's lap, very calm and happy, instead of running all over the place and hiding and leaning over into his gut. And he was making massive changes in 24 hours. And even Isaac, who is a raging bull kiddo, who also started on Monday, and we found the same thing, he's a raging bull versus drunken bull. So anger and outbursts and fighting and all sorts of things for this little dude who's so sweet and so wonderful. And so we got in there. Thanks to the scans, we made very specific targeted adjustments again to his thoracic transition zones, because it's that first in a lot of these chronic cases. And within, Isaac was a kiddo who literally could not sleep. If he slept 8 hours, if he got 8 hours of quantity, it was 8 hours of a mess. He was restless, he was up and down. So every day he'd wake up exhausted. Every day he'd wake up more dysregulated. And when you're exhausted as a kiddo or a human, you're emotional. When you're emotional, you're easily irritated and angered. So sleep for Isaac is everything. And within his first 2 days of getting adjusted, he slept 12 hours each night completely soundly and woke up for the first time in his life, since all the way back as a baby, happy, calm, regulated. So I know I took another 5 to 10 minutes there to tell you 3 stories before I get into the 3 different scans and the different things we find with them. But I gotta tell you, the parents knew, even prior to these adjustments, that these changes were going to happen, because they could see the problem literally on these scans. We knew, I'm actually going in the wrong sequence there. I knew, as these kiddos providers and my doc team knew, oh my gosh, when we adjust here, we're absolutely going to see this kiddo sleep. Oh my goodness, when we adjust here, we're going to get this motor tone and coordination, this weak core. We're going to address that, then we'll calm, and then we'll regulate. Like, we literally get to direct our care plan, our adjustments, our techniques. We can literally start to what we call our shot with adjustments based upon these scans, and we can predict what real life changes parents will experience in a relatively short amount of time and a sequential batting order because of the scans. I promised myself I wouldn't do an hour-long episode about the INSiGHT scans, and I feel like I'm starting to track that way, because there's nothing more life-changing for your family than getting these scans. There's nothing more life-changing than seeing them continue to change. And so many of you also will understandably write in and go, man, we did this for a while, we're not seeing any change. And I know as a parent what you mean is on the outside with the symptoms. One of the most important features of the scans is we actually track change from the inside. And when kids are so chronically sick and challenged, it takes a long time to break through that tension and that dysregulation and get the body and the brain and the nervous system to catch back up developmentally and see the change on the outside symptomatically. So the scans are essential for that function as well. And if you ever feel like, okay, well, as the more I listen to this podcast and the more I get after this with Dr. Tony, and especially this one, we're going to dive deep into the INSiGHT scans, and you think, did my doc look at it for that level, that depth? What's so cool is all PX docs out there who are practicing and seeing kiddos, obviously it's like any other directory, there's different levels and time and experience that doctors have trained with us and gone through this, and how many intensive kids and others. So it's just how it is, right? We're getting everybody across this line of advanced training, but they have access through a community clinical forum. If they're looking at scans, or they have scans in a kiddo who is stuck or plateaued or regressing, we just did an episode about that too, and challenge, they can actually upload those scans in that child's case history into a HIPAA-protected clinical forum, and they can have myself and our doc team review those scans. So parents listening, what we are not able to do very often, much at all, through the podcast, through Instagram, through our support inbox, is be able to directly dictate, decide, care with we're just not closely connected enough to the depth of the case history, nor is it within our scope of practice to provide advice at that level directly to your family. But I wanted to sneak this one in while we're talking about the INSiGHT scans. Not only are your doctors trained on all of these levers at the INSiGHT scans, levels and levers to pull from the INSiGHT scans, but I want you to know 2 things. Number 1, it's the toughest thing by far for a chiropractor to learn. It's not taught in school. Not just is this technology not in most schools and chiropractic schools, but even when it is, it's taught in a very basic, rudimentary version, and most other chiropractic groups teach it at that level too. Now, there's our level, which, as you can tell as I break this down, is at an extremely the highest level out there. And so it takes us chiropractors, PX docs, it took me years and years and years to put together what's called this advanced level of scan interpretation, pattern recognition, clinical protocols, and decision making. So we absolutely do have it in our training program and our certification program that any doctor on the PX Docs directory has gone through. They have to go through that first to get on there. But going through it one time gets you to first base, second base. And I just want you to know, parents, that this is the most advanced work, I think, in healthcare. The nervous system is the most advanced, intricate, complex, tricky son of a gun system in the body. And so I just want you to know that us docs are doing everything we can to pour into your kiddos' INSiGHT scans, find all of these details. We call them depth finders in the training. It really is an advanced training. It's an advanced art. And so continue to work with your doctor as you get these scans and go through these scans. And if you run into stuck points, continue to encourage your doctors. And docs that are out there listening, you know you have access to that. And if you didn't know, from your onboarding emails and training and everything else, we teach you a lot. So if you missed this part, chiropractors listening, you can reach out to us and get our help on these scans. Okay, so last parts of this. First thing is the foundational thing to review. The nervous system's the boss. So the reason that I'm titling this one absolutely the most important, it's not even close, test you can get for your kiddos is not because I'm saying, hey, genetic testing or gut testing, labs looking for heavy metals, labs looking for parasites and bacteria, stool samples. I mean, I've done, my kiddos, I got 3 girls, we run all sorts of stuff to make sure that they're always healthy. So we are the most in love with the functional, you have a legit provider in the functional integrative world if they are doing a high level of testing. It's the same conversation over there. That's why the neurologist, that's why most of your, a neurologist, oh, we didn't see anything on the EEG. Come on, man. That's not even a functionality test, right? So medicine struggles to get results traditional because they don't really do any testing for dysfunction to restore function. Now, the integrative, holistic, functional world, those are the bosses. The best of the best don't cookie cutter anything. They run labs, they run analysis. But in this world, the reason that I would say, even compared to the OAT test and all these other sort of things, this is the most important test because so many kiddos have gone through so much nervous system dysfunction and challenge that what happens is their gut, their immune system, their inflammation, their detoxification pathways are all limited and shut down when subluxation, dysfunction, dysautonomia, and dysregulation hit a certain level of depth and severity. So getting this test first, or looking at this test as the foundational decision-making for clinical decision-making, this is where it really comes down with. And there is no other test in all of healthcare that looks for nervous system dysfunction, dysregulation, dysautonomia, and subluxation. It will not show up on blood work. It will not show up on x-rays. It will not show up on symptoms checklists. It won't show up on stool or hair analysis. There's nothing that looks for nervous system dysfunction except the INSiGHT scans. So there's 3 of them, okay? The first scan that we run, and we can run this on infants, as a day-old infant can get 2 out of these 3 tests. You gotta be a little bit older to get the EMG, which we'll talk about in a second. But the first test is called the neurothermal. This detects and measures nervous system dysfunction and specifically what's called regional or local dysautonomia. Now, dysautonomia is where the sympathetic, fight or flight, stress, tension, gut shutdown, pro-inflammation side of the nervous system runs the show. The other side of dysautonomia is where the vagus nerve, parasympathetic, relaxation, digestion, function, regulation, growth, development, immune boosting, anti-inflammatory, sleep side of the nervous system runs. So when we use the neurothermal scans, we are looking at a global assessment with the thermal scans to see if there is multiple regions of subluxation and dysautonomia, but then we also get not just the global view from the thermal scans, but what's really awesome about the thermal scans is we can start to really pinpoint exactly where within the neurospinal system these major or primary subluxations set up shop. Now, what is that terminology? Again, parents, I want to not just make this like a chiro to chiro training. I want to make it sure it lands for you. The major and primary subluxations are the ones that need to be adjusted first because they are the ones causing the most issues. So what the neurothermal scan allows us to do is to not just see if your child is struggling with overall nervous system dysregulation and dysautonomia, but we can actually pinpoint and target where these major subluxations are, and we can direct our first foundational adjustments there because the nervous system needs to get rid of its biggest problems first. It's the opposite. We were joking in the office the other day. The way we get kids better neurologically is the opposite of Dave Ramsey and Debt Advisor's snowball. You know, you start with the little swan, then you build that up into the big one. Not in this work. We fry the biggest fish first. The biggest subluxations your kiddos have are the ones that are actually messing with their foundational problems. Now, hear me on this. This is really detailed, parents, and I know I've been talking for a while, but you gotta really hear this. This is so life-changing when you hear this, and then when you get your child scans and you see this. Major subluxations create, in chiropractic, it's been talked about for 100 years, major subluxations create major conditions, major levels of dysfunction. Now, in your parent heart, 1000% understandably so, to you, the major condition your child is struggling with is the big brain-based stuff, I'm gonna call it. It's their seizures, it's their meltdowns, it's their anxiety, it's their tantrums, it's their nonverbal autism spectrum. So the major issue on your heart, understandably so, is the brain-based stuff, the autism stuff, the epilepsy stuff, the behavior stuff, the emotional stuff. Those are brain-based challenges. But what the nervous system does, it works in a very specific hierarchy or sequence of function. The basics of health, the most important components of health, are the basics of health: sleep, digestion, motor planning, so sensory, motor, tone, and coordination, things like posture and movement and motor milestones, and then immune function and respiratory function. Those 5 functions are what we call the neurosoft signs, or the foundational neurophysiological building blocks of health. What we find all the time with our thermal scans is that where a child is most subluxated and needs help with most first is in the basics of function. Every single child I find with autism has severe gut, immune. Again, if I put them together, not everybody has all gut, all immune, all everything, but their motor system, their sensory system, their digestive system, their sleep, and their immune system are a mess. The 5 basics are a mess. We see it on thermal, and we can target our adjustments to get that stuff better first, okay? Same with teenagers. Every epilepsy patient, every anxiety patient, every POTS patient, every PANDAS patient we take care of, teens, young adults, their sleep, their digestion, their immune function, their posture, especially with POTS obviously, is exhausted and dysregulated, and we need to fix that first. So moving from the thermal scans into EMG, because posture makes me think of that, the surface EMG, or the neurosensory stress test, that's what this is. It measures tension, asymmetry, exhaustion, and what we like to call energy drain or energy excess. And many kids, especially if your child is locked into autism to some degree, form, or fashion, whatever level 1, 2, or 3, especially 3, you really need to get this EMG. If you got an ADHD kiddo, an anxiety kiddo, a sensory kiddo, a dysregulated kiddo, a PANDAS kiddo, a motor tic kiddo, you gotta get your child an EMG scan. Because what we find is most of them have both issues that show up on EMG. They are hyper wound, so there's too much tension, there's too much stress, there's too much noise going into their brain, because that's what the sensory motor system does. It either calms the brain, proprioception, or it pisses off the brain, nociception, noxious, annoying stimuli. Once you've been stuck with too much neurosensory, neuromotor tone, usually in the cervicals and the transitional zones from birth trauma, forceps, vacuum induction, so we see all sorts of blowout and tension on the EMG in the cervicals, the thoracics, and transition zones, and what we find is we find energy drain and exhaustion on the EMG in the adrenals, in the core, and in the areas that supply digestive motility and detoxification and elimination. So the liver, the kidneys, the adrenals, and the digestive system are all motor function. The gut is a muscle. And it is completely under control of the autonomic neuromotor motility system. And so what we find with EMG is we really find the movement issues, the tone issues, the coordination issues, the motor. So the M is the motor in there, neuromotor. But it'll actually really show us a lot with respiratory, congestive, asthma, allergies, food intolerances, gut issues, constipation. The EMG is essential, not just for motor, coordination, posture, and sensory overload issues, but we can actually track things with inside dysmotor function as well. And the third test is the HRV, heart rate variability. Now, the third test is both kind of the most complex to talk about, but it's also the simplest. So HRV tracks overall nervous system adaptability, resiliency, and we like to think of it as battery charge. Okay, the analogy I've given for the 15 years I've been running HRV scans on my patients is to think about your smartphone. Think about your cell phone, okay? When we first got cell phones, the only thing we used our cell phones for was calling, okay? Then came texting. Remember when you were texting? Are you my age where you had to hit what would be a TB? I think to get to a T, you had to hit 8 2 times. You literally used to just like Morse code in digital form, okay? I know it's not Morse code, but you get where I'm going with that, all right? Now, think about everything you use your smartphone for. Think about your day as a mom and a dad and the 5 million functions that are important for life. Your family's calendar is in there. Your work email's in there. Your connection to your kids and picking them up and doing all this other sort of stuff. We're literally the amount of apps. And then think about all the apps and the things we use our phone for that drain its batteries and drain ours, and we probably should, the news. Okay. So the truth is we use our phone's battery for more function and call a freaking phone what it is, more stress than ever. And so our battery drains. I always it's a running joke inside my team because we'll be communicating something, especially like a win. Somebody will post something amazing on social media about a kid's, and they'll take a screenshot of it. Jackie, I'm going to call her out, our chief art officer. Jackie's battery somehow is perpetually red. She's never below 20 or never above 20%. So when she sends me this life transforming miracle, the only thing I can look at when she sends me a screenshot is like, goodness, woman, charge your phone. You're stressing me out over here, Maybe just because I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and so if you didn't, actually I grew up without phones. So, if you got straight in the middle of nowhere, well, that's how I was a farm kid, north, south, east, west, and head for help, okay? So the truth is, we drain our batteries like never before. So HRV is a full global test for resiliency and adaptability, which means it shows how far your child might be out of balance, dysautonomia, and exhausted nervous system, not just dysregulation, but the end output of subluxation, nervous system dysfunction, and dysregulation is exhaustion. So the last chapter, these scans allow us as pediatric chiropractors to measure these 4 things and make our clinical decisions from them. And I know I always go longer than I intend to. Sorry, Dr. Morgan and team, but these are the nuts and bolts that this is what we train our chiropractors. So we have an almost 100-hour certification course. Basically, yes, we have to teach them all the science and the philosophy first, but then we get to it. All of our work, all of our clinical decision-making and protocols are dictated by these incredible INSiGHT scans. Shout out to Dr. Fletcher and the crazy, impactful neuro wizard and team at CLA who brings these to life for us so we can change your family's and your child's life. So there's 4 things. You could kind of argue 5. I want to rip through them. And this is going to sound really simple when I go through what these things are and how we make clinical decisions from the INSiGHT scans for these 4 things. But man, this is tough work. It is really, really, really tough work. Once you get it really trained on the protocols and you have experience, you can start to see the forest through the trees. But these 4 things are here. Number 1, is your child dysregulated? Are they subluxated? Is dysautonomia the real root cause? Remember we said with this title of this one, it's the number 1 most important test, and it's hidden in plain sight, and no one else checks it. So first thing we figure out from the INSiGHT scans is this: can we help your child? Can we help your family? Sometimes there's other things like mold in the home, heavy metals. Every now and again, about 2% of the time, is the best calculation, we will run a set of scans and the scans are so exhausted that we have to kick them in. We got to get that kiddo adjusted. So about 100% of the time we find that we can help kiddos, but sometimes we take the case history and other sort of things and we go, okay, we are absolutely going to be able to help, but there's a game of tug of war going on here. And most of our patients today have already gone down functional med, biomed, but if they don't know about those things, we will do those things in tandem. So I'm kind of answering a question within a question. Another one came in that said, hey, we're so excited to start with PX Docs, but we just found out that our home is completely full of mold and mycotoxins. And so I get the sequence of things, but will the nervous system really heal if it's got that much drag on it? So in that case, that's what's hard when I draw out the things and I talk about sequence. It seems like it's really black and white. Do this first. And then like there's a clean line in the sand that says, okay, now do that second. It all merges together once you really get your kiddo's healing going. But step one from the scans is, can we help? Is your child subluxated? Number two, how bad? How much? What are we up against? So there's neurometrics. So what we've done in our clinic and now taught to PX Docs, and again, this is cutting edge stuff. No one else in chiropractic does this, and we're getting better at it every single day. We'll continue to do more research and leverage this technology because it's life-changing for us to change your lives. So we know based upon what are called neurometrics and analysis and scores that the scans print out, and we actually turn that into what's called the PX Care Plan Builder, which is proven out over decades of figuring out the clinical research, and most importantly, 2 decades of applying this work in practice. So we build very neuroplastic derived, neurologically scientifically based, custom, individualized, personalized care plans for your child based upon the scans. If we don't get the initial frequency, most chiropractors, if they're missing out on getting results, it's not even number 3, number 4 that I'm going to get to next. They just didn't recommend enough care or they backed off too soon. What I find 90% of the time, maybe 80% of the time, when I dig in with other chiropractors and they're just not getting results with the kiddo, or they're in the middle of the care plan and they start to see plateaus and regressions like we covered on last week's episode, they backed off too soon, or they take the regression as a sign of regression when it's actually reorganization, very similar words, but very different things, and they back off with care instead of push through. And the care plan is a very, very, very intricate science to figure out the frequency. How often does your child need to be get adjusted? Think of that like our dosage to a degree. Not my favorite term because we're helping without drugs, but it makes sense for most parents. And then the duration. So dosage and duration is there with the care plan. Number 3, we can target it. I already talked about this with Levi, Cal, and INSiGHT. The fact that we now know exactly where to adjust, number 3, and I'm going to merge together number 4, how to adjust is also the same as saying where not to adjust and how not to adjust. See, what makes a PX doc entirely different is not only their depth of understanding about nervous system dysregulation, not only their depth of care planning and personalization, but what really separates a pediatric PX docs trained from all other pediatric chiropractors and nervous system focused chiropractors is we really know how to target adjustment locations from scans. That we teach other things to do this too. It's a 5-step check and the scans are one of them. And they really help us figure out exactly where to adjust, where not to adjust, so we can do less, not more. Less is actually more in neurological healing. And then also choose the right technique. Chiropractic has a ton of different techniques, and this is very essential to choose the right approach to adjusting based upon not what school you went to, not what technique your mentor did, but what your patient needs. And I've said a lot, I think, in this episode that is really essential, but if you really want to know the real difference, massive difference between a PX trained doctor and other chiropractors, we do not at all adhere to a singular technique, because not every child is subluxated. Not every patient is subluxated in the same pattern or what's called phase or stage of subluxation and dysregulation. So what we figured out in our clinic and now taught to our PX Docs network with the INSiGHT scan. So even other chiropractors who have INSiGHT scans, probably, if they're not a PX doc, they don't have this training on these last 3 functions, okay? They have the scans. You can have the tool. I got golf clubs. I can't golf like Tiger, okay? Actually, Tiger's getting a little bit, go for it. I'm sure, no, he'd still slay me, okay? Tiger could be 140 years old, have his 67th back surgery, and still beat me in golf, okay? But I have nice clubs. So I've got the tool, but I don't have the training. I don't have the skill to be as advanced at the craft. That's the INSiGHT scans. And so I was so stoked to do this episode because not only can I get you as parents to really understand the powerful, like unbelievable life transformation, but I really did want to get into the granular details about how we use the scans. I know parents, you want to know that stuff. I love that you want that depth of understanding about the care your child is receiving in a PX Doc's office and about the depth and the advanced that they may not be receiving in other offices. And so we choose the technique not based upon, oh, it's comfortable for us because we are skilled in that. It's not about us. It's about your child experiencing their miracle. And so we are actually trained in a multitude of techniques. And most kids actually need multiple techniques over the course of their care plan. And the most advanced neurological cases, we will actually do what's called a mixing of techniques. We may adjust their upper cervical in a very light, sustained, tonal way, and we may have to adjust their exhausted, depleted neuroadrenal core and transition zones in a neurotonal, more manual, gentle, smooth, easy, relaxing, recharging way. But it's the technique differences that are one of the real granular details. But man, you want to talk about, you've heard the phrase before, like, do sweat the small stuff. The details do matter. When you are talking about healing, restoring, reorganizing neurological function, these details, which are completely, entirely dependent in a lot of ways upon the INSiGHT scans. We have other checks that we do too, and it's a very developed system in addition to the INSiGHT scans, but this is what your child deserves. This is what you deserve. So to put this one in recap, parents are seeing the results with their kiddos, but our results are really dependent upon these INSiGHT scans. I'm so glad this question came into the platform, and I'm actually going to add this video to our article. If there was ever a time that you listen to this podcast and you take the time to go to the show notes and go to our website, and even if you don't want to go to the show notes, you can literally just go to PXDocs, www.pxdocs.com, okay? And right under resources, you'll see an article front and center called INSiGHT Scans. I'm going to put this video in there too, the video of this podcast, to really go through it. But it's the proof that proves, moms, dads, you were right all along. There is something more. There is something deeper. You knew it. This test, these scans, emotionally, I don't know that you'll ever quite have a moment in your child's healing journey like when you can sit across the desk from a PX doc and have these scans shown, interpreted, and reported. The majority of times I do my reports and my scan interpretations, and I used to do this. I should come back to do this now that I think about it out loud here. I used to, and call me corny, but I am, okay? So I lean into it, all right? 43-year-old dude, dad. And so I'm not wearing New Balances or anything. Like, give me a break here. But the truth is, I used to put 2 sets of Kleenexes, like 2 boxes of Kleenexes on the desk where we would do reported findings. And this is very corny, but it's also very real. And I would, during this time, when I would be showing the scans to parents and moms, and they would see and become validated, you were right all along. There is something beyond the genetic testing, the GI testing, and the gut-brain connection and everything else. There is something. You can't unsee it once you see it. So one Kleenex would be for the tears of, which is real with parents. I've had this happen with my kiddos. When you figure things out over time, you don't always have it right away because it's just the journey we're on. And so sometimes the tears are almost kind of frustration. Like, dang it, I wish I'd known this. I wish I'd had this before. That's pretty real life for us in our clinic. And I get that, and I feel that, and I empathize with that 1,000% as a parent. And the other set of tissues are for the tears of joy, the tears of excitement, the tears of happiness, the tears of hope, freaking being restored like none other, because you can see it. Now you know. Now you found it. So we always joke with our patients, but it's real. It's not really a joke. The bad news is the good news. When we find subluxation, nervous system dysfunction, and especially if it's depth and it's disorganized and all the things we got to do with our advanced clinical care, it's the best news ever, because we know we're not guessing anymore. We're not throwing darts anymore like traditional medicine does. We're not just chasing symptoms anymore. We're not just trying to restore the gut. We're actually trying to restore the thing that controls the gut, which is the nervous system. We're not just trying to shut down inflammation with supplementation. We're actually rebuilding neurological function so it will detox, eliminate, and handle inflammation on its own. It's the most exciting report moment you'll ever get. And it only gets more exciting because we continue to direct care with progress scans, and you can see the scans. You can see your child healing neurologically from the inside out in real time, because healing takes a long time. And healing is a freaking roller coaster. And healing neurologically is whack-a-mole. One thing will be getting better and two things might pop up and get worse. Then those two things get better and then one thing gets worse. It's healing. It's messy. It's never going to go as quick as we want. Both us as providers and you as parents, it rarely goes as smooth as you want. It's a real complicated, intricate system that we have simplified incredibly clinically with our PX Docs clinical process, directed from the beginning and all the way through by the INSiGHT scans. So my nervous system is about toast and about out of gas, because I just got to talk about with you perhaps my very, as far as technology goes, my favorite thing in history. Nothing can ever test it. So the takeaway is, if your child struggles, you name it, fill in the blank, and you feel like you've had every test under the sun, until you've had the INSiGHT test, you haven't really found the real root cause. It's nearly 100% of our patients, from colic and constipation to cerebral palsy and seizures and autism, this is what they're struggling with the most from a root cause standpoint: nervous system dysfunction and subluxation. We do not guess, we test, and this dictates and really controls all of our clinical decision making. And it's, out of all the things we could talk about, these INSiGHT scans are the real linchpin. They're the real key to our world-class. Often when you first hear about this work, it's almost a little unbelievable. Like, how could that be true? How could one thing, chiropractic care, see benefit and change and transformation with so many things? Because the nervous system runs everything. So when it's dysregulated, subluxated, dysautonomic, dysfunctional, we find it with the INSiGHT scans. We choose the care plan, target the adjustments, get the right technique, keep tracking it, because we might need to change those levers as we go along. We definitely do. And that's how we get your child through the storm and to the other side. And we can track it and celebrate it all along the way when the INSiGHT scans get better. Those kiddos I talked about before, Cal's initial EMG, which should have been like healthy, is about 150 to 200, came in at 500 on his first day. Within those first 4 targeted intensive adjustments, it dropped 230 points into the 200s. Life changing. That's why he's sleeping. That's why he's calm. That's why he's regulating. Isaac's dropped 130 points. That's why he's sleeping through the night. So we track these changes. Every 6 to 12 adjustments, a child gets another set of INSiGHT scans, and you can literally see your child healing neurologically, often even before you can see it symptomatically. But most often, these two trains run down the same set of tracks in parallel, and you can see the life transformation happening on the outside with your child's condition and symptoms. But what we're obsessed about, and what we really do, is we don't treat, cure, or fix any of those symptoms or conditions. We just restore neurological function, get it back to balance, get it back to regulation, and we can track it to make sure that we're actually doing it so that it can stick and last all lifelong for your child via the INSiGHT scans. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Do you have a question that you would like to submit? Either send it to support@pxdocs.com with the subject Ask Dr. Tony, or head on over to our socials @PXDocs, where you can submit your question in our stories every single week. Every kid counts and every family counts, so let's leave no questions left unanswered. If you loved this episode and you want to help us reach more kids, we would so appreciate if you left a review and a rating on your favorite platform. God bless, be well. We'll see you on the next one.